One of the key defining traits of Design the Everything up until like a couple weeks ago was that I didn't know what we were supposed to be doing or what we were doing or what we were good at or where we should be going. I was just flailing, and we spent years flailing. Most of you wouldn't know this, but Design the Everything is 6 years old as of a couple days ago. And before that, it was called Indiana Prototyping. What I'm trying to say is the history of Design the Everything is confused and hard to explain. So there was one moment that I remember pretty clearly that I consider the start of Design the Everything. I was in college at Purdue, sitting in my best friend's room, Scott DeRuby. I did a podcast episode with him if you want to meet him. And he was looking at Kickstarter. And Scott was a fan of pens. And so naturally, he started looking on Kickstarter for pens. And he kept finding pen campaigns that were making like $200,000. I think the one he showed me was one of the early tactile turn ones, or maybe Urban Survival Gear. I don't know. There's a bunch of guys in the community that have done really successful pen Kickstarters. And he was like, holy crap, how is a simple pen making $200,000? We can make a pen to make $200,000. He was like, AJ, you're an engineer. Let's make a pen. And I was like, I like money. We can totally make a pen to make $200,000. That was how Design the Everything started. We wanted to do a Kickstarter pen because we saw, and again, I think it was Will at Tactile Turns Kickstarter. And that led us down this whole big long rabbit hole of figuring out how to make pens. We had a lot of false starts and detours that's not worth getting into. But about probably 3 years after that conversation, right as I was getting out of Purdue, we launched our first Kickstarter, which was for the Spire pen. At this point, I had a general idea of what machining was and how it worked, but no experience. So we used a service called Shapeways to manufacture them for us. The Spire pen was 3D printed out of stainless steel. And honestly, it wasn't actually that bad. I think it looked really good, though the function wasn't quite there, and we didn't know enough about the industry at the time to do a good job of choosing the right internals. We used a terrible refill and a terrible mechanism. I think if we'd done that better, we probably actually could have made, like $4,000 or $5,000 on that. I think as it was, we made about $2,000. Or I should say, the campaign ended with us making about $2,000. At the end of it, we definitely did not make $2,000. We ran into a bunch of issues with our 3D printed parts, and we had to get them made at least twice. And those 3D printed parts were really expensive and just ate all of our budget. So I'm pretty sure we didn't lose money on that campaign, but we did not make much, if any, money. But, it was a successful campaign. It finished on time. We fulfilled all of our orders. And that was a huge learning experience for us. With the momentum from that first campaign, we started trying to figure out how we could do a second, better pen, incorporating the lessons that we learned. Since the 3D printed parts were so expensive, we started trying to figure out how we could make those ourselves. At some point in that process, I started learning about machining. And I was trying to find a good source of information on it. And I did what is honestly probably one of the most influential things in my life, even though it seems small. I was a big fan of podcasts, and so I wanted to know about machining. And so I just went on to my podcast app and I searched the word machining, which is how I found the Business of Machining podcast. And I just fell in love. I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is everything that I need to know. And I just fell in love. I started listening and was like, oh, they're talking about all the things that I need to know. I have so much to learn. This is exactly what I wanted. This is exactly what I needed. And I've been a loyal listener to The Bomb ever since then. Listening to that podcast, I learned about the kinds of machines that I would need. And one of the hosts, named John Grimsmo, was talking about his lathe, which at this point he used to make knife parts. I don't think he was making a pen at this point, though he later would. And so I was like, I want a lathe, and I started looking into them and learned that lathes are really expensive. But I was able to find a really small, really cheap one for about $1,000 down in Kentucky. So my wife and I drove down to Kentucky and we picked up this little lathe. It was $1,000 and we paid cash. And it turns out it was a really good deal. Now it needed a ton of work. It didn't have a controller, and getting that retrofitted on was a huge learning project. but the lathe itself had almost never been ran. It was like 30 or 40 years old, but it was basically brand new. I was eventually able to get that lathe up and running, but I learned very quickly that there was a lot to learn. We briefly tried to make pens on that, but realized that it was beyond our skill level at the time. So we didn't, hot, burning. We didn't have the skills to make the pen, so we tried to find a more simple product we could make. Something that was one piece and easy to manufacture. One of the first test pieces I made on that lathe was a top, like a toy top, a spinning top. Hideously ugly. Like, it was not supposed to be a pretty part. Like, it was just supposed to spin, and like it spun for a couple minutes. And that somehow led us into this world of super high-end top makers. And yes, that is a niche that exists. People that are really into spinning tops. In that community, I regularly saw high-end tops sell for $2,000 or $3,000. I saw people sell collections of tops for like $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. It's kind of like the high-end knife community where there's people who just have a passion and a lot of money and they spend it on things. And there's makers who are able to use that to their own benefit. And I was like, I want to make a top for $2,000. And so we started working on a top. And from the beginning, the plan was not to sell it for $2,000. And we developed a top. And it actually was a pretty good top, especially for our price point in that community. In our testing, we were able to get that top to spin for like 10 minutes, like literally 10 minutes at a time if you had it in a glass lens. And so like that actually brought us some attention. We launched that as a Kickstarter and it did pretty reasonably well. We hit about $4,500 on that Kickstarter and then something happened. I don't remember what it was. Anyway, something happened at the end of that Kickstarter and a bunch of people canceled their pledges because they were worried about having enough money. And that campaign ended at about $3,600, $3,700, which was big for us. Like, that was a lot of money and we were actually able to make a reasonable profit from that. And we were able to turn out those tops pretty quickly. So after the Arch, that was really where I started going, okay, this is kind of a thing that I want to do for a living. And so I started looking into ways to just do more, do them better, do them faster, do more campaigns and stuff. And then Scott and I came up with the idea to start collaborating with other makers to be able to do more with less resources. Because we were both busy. I believe at this point, Scott was just getting married and still in college. I think I was out of college at this point, but working a full-time job. And so we started another campaign for a wallet that we called the Buttress Wallet. And we did a bad job at it. And so the marketing on that campaign and like the product, and it was all just together not great. It was all poor. We ended up canceling that campaign because we knew we weren't going to hit our goal. And we had intended on relaunching it with better resources, but we were just we never were able to. And at some point, pretty much just on a whim, another small CNC machine which was like wildly expensive for what it is, basically just because I thought it was cool. It was an impulse buy. And honestly, probably not a very justifiable buy at the time, but ended up being a great decision. I didn't have money for it. It was like $4,500. I could not afford it, but I was able to convince the guy to let me buy it on PayPal credit, which gives you 6 months interest-free to pay it off. I bought that machine and was like, holy crap, I need to make money with it. I was looking around to my friends and one of them had been really successful in making branding irons, but had stopped doing it. And I was like, I can make branding irons. And so he got me started making branding irons. Since I had those payments that I needed to make, it really pushed me to like actually get work done and start cranking out branding irons. It was probably a 20-pound CNC machine. It fit neatly on your desk. It cost me $4,500. I think I made about $10,000 with that in the first year of having it, just selling branding irons. And it was like, wow, this is working. Like, there's something here. And with the money that machine made, I was able to buy a bigger one. My Instagram really started to explode because it was a cool machine. Like, I was seeing success for the first time and growth for the first time and non-Kickstarter related profits for the first time. So like, that was a big deal for me. And my big takeaway there was like, having something to kind of push you forwards was really valuable. has influenced a lot of the future of Design the Everything. So I just kind of kept working on it, kept driving forwards, little by little. And at this point, I was just like all the way in, all the way committed. Like I knew that this is what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to have my own business. I wanted to be making a physical product. And at some point, I sat down and I did the math on what I needed to be able to go full time working at Design the Everything. And I realized that I needed a bigger CNC machine. That little one I had was fantastic for what it is, for what it was, but it was just too small. And at some point, at the end of the day, material removal rate, it determines how much money you make. So I knew I needed a bigger machine. That little desktop machine may have been able to make me $10,000 a year, but you can't make a living off that, especially when you have, let's see, at this point I probably had 2 kids and a wife. No, I had all 3 kids. At this point I had 3 kids and a wife. And so I started looking into bigger machines. And the obvious one at the time was the Tormach 1100 MX, which I did end up buying. Before the accessories for it, that machine was about $31,000, which works out to be $660 a month. And then you need tooling and accessories on top of that, which was probably another $5 to $10K. So like this was a lot of money at this point. And I agonized over this decision for like weeks or months, not just weeks. I agonized over this decision for months. Do I go with the better machine? Do I stick with what I have? Do I try to use third-party manufacturers? What do I do? And then at some point, I just decided that I had to go for it and that this was my goal. And if I was ever going to hit that goal, it needed to be now. There was never going to be a better time. This is also when I had a conversation with Scott about leaving Design the Everything. He had some of his own personal stuff going on, and he was working on his own freelance career. And like, I didn't want to drag him with me into this risky decision. Like, I didn't want him to take some of the ownership of this debt with me. So we sat down over sushi and figured out our path forwards. And that's when Scott decided to leave Design the Everything. But with it just being me, I felt a lot more comfortable taking that risk. And I sent my purchase order. And a couple months later, that machine showed up and I set it up in my garage. Like I said, that machine took a couple months to come in. And during that time, I developed the parametric pry bar, which was my first truly parametric product, and launched that as a Kickstarter. When I launched that Kickstarter, the machine hadn't actually come in yet. So when it did come in, I had to frantically get it set up to do production. The other fun thing that happened during that Kickstarter is we moved to this new shop here. Before I was just working out of a 2-car garage, but then we bought this place that has an 1,800 square foot shop and 200 amps of power. And the Kickstarter at this point was over, and I had already machined all the pry bars before my move, but then I got here and just had to finish the hand finishing portion of them. And I think that pretty much gets us back up to present day. I have a few things in the works, but nothing that's really done yet.